Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about consumers, producers, and the efficiency of markets. Um, so you may have noticed that economists don't run the world. People don't always think like economists. The average person may have thoughts that differ dramatically from what you hear economists talk about. The equilibrium price and quantity may not feel correct to everyone. If it does, to whom? Um, so we're going to start talking about welfare economics, and that isn't just studying, a program like the welfare program. It's going to be discussing the economic well-being of consumers and producers. Have you ever considered whether people in this country feel happier or less happy than people in other countries? Well, there are metrics that we use to track things, and I invite you to look those up. I mentioned a couple here. And maybe before you click the links, maybe consider where do you think the US might rank in overall happiness metric, and then see how that compares to what you find. So as we work to measure economic wellness, we're going to talk about surplus. And that can be broken down into a couple of different types, including consumer and producer surplus. So what is that? Well, we're going to look at the willingness of a person to pay for a good and the difference between the price they're charged and that willingness to pay. And that's going to give us the consumer surplus. So let's say you're willing to pay $100 for an item and you're able to get it for $80. What is that $20 difference? Well, that is the consumer surplus that you're enjoying by paying less than you were willing to pay. So talked about the demand curve. Well, since it's downward sloping, we know that as price increases, buyers drop off. Well, the marginal buyer is defined as the buyer that would drop off if you increase the price at all. We can see that here through the demand schedule. If $50 is charged for a good, you have these four buyers: Gaga, Rihanna, Carey, and Taylor. And if you increase the price from $50 to $70, Gaga drops off. So she is at $50, that marginal buyer. You can see here that the consumer surplus for each buyer can be represented by the triangle, the difference from what they're willing to pay. So Taylor's willing to pay $100 at a $70 price. Her consumer surplus is $30. And then Carey, who is willing to pay $80, has a consumer surplus of $10. The total consumer surplus aggregates these two areas. So you can, looking back here, if the price is $50, you'd have this entire area as consumer surplus, but at $70, it evaporates. No longer is consumer surplus. So we can talk about what happens to it later, depending upon why the price is changing. Here, using our typical demand curve, downward sloping, you can see that if P1 is our price, all of this area from Q1 back to 0, all of this area represents consumer surplus because all of these buyers would have been willing to pay higher price. Buyers at this quantity would have been willing to pay this price, so their consumer per surplus would have been this area. When you aggregate them all, it's this entire area. If, however, you lower the price from P1 to P2, then you increase the consumer surplus by all of the existing buyers by this area right here, this rectangle. And then as you're selling more because you lowered the price, you've got this new triangle here of consumer surplus to all of the new customers. So you can calculate this area by using your typical formulas for calculating an area. I invite you to read through my comments here. So policy makers may use consumer surplus as a measure of well-being, but they may not be happy with the purchaser's decisions. If you want to hear some commentary, you can search on this video here. They're out of it, so you can look at the video yourself. All right, now we're going to take a break for the quick quiz. Please pause the video, attempt it yourself, then come back for the explanation. All right, so question number 1, Alexis, Bruno, and Camilla each want an ice cream cone. Alexis is willing to pay 12, Bruno 8, Camilla 4. The market price is 6. The consumer surplus equals, I think back to that demand schedule we looked at earlier and how we added up those the consumer surplus. So for that first buyer, Alexis, the first quantity, their willingness to pay 12 minus the price they're paying, 6. So that's 12 minus 6, so 6. And then the next person is willing to pay 8, but only paid 6. So there's 2 from them. And then Camilla was only willing to pay 4, so she's not a buyer, so she doesn't factor in. So the total consumer surplus is B, or 8. Question number 2, if the price of an ice cream cone falls to 4, the consumer surplus of Alexis, Bruno, and Camilla increases by how much? Well, the first 2 people are each paying $1 less, so their surplus increases by $1, and now Camilla is experiencing a consumer surplus of 1. Oops, sorry, looking back at that, I see price is falling to 3. So the decrease is $3. So the first 2 people enjoy a consumer surplus of $3 more, so that's $6. And then Camilla enjoys a $1 amount of consumer surplus, so that's going to be B, 7 total increase in consumer surplus. Then question 3, the demand curve for cookies is downward sloping. Yes. When the price of cookies is $3, the quantity demanded is 100. If the price falls to $2, what happens to consumer surplus? So we're seeing relative changes in which is going to increase or fall more. So this can be tricky to think through. We're going to talk through it. So the answer is going to be D. It's going to rise by more than $100. Let's try to look at why. So when you look here, hopefully you can tell that when the price fell from this $3 here to $2, obviously consumer surplus would increase, but this should show why it's increasing by more than 100, because that $1 increase is multiplied by not just the initial quantity demanded of 100, but by the new amount that is demanded. So it's going to be $100 increase times 100 plus all of this new consumer surplus here, since the demand is downward sloping. Okay, I can see that here. Here's the original consumer surplus. And then you can see it adds by a greater amount, this area here. So this would be 100, and this would be the new amount, or about, let's say, 50. You can play around in Desmos, and then if you want to create your own models and don't want to do the math yourself, you can use tools like ChatGPT to simplify your life. You'll see me using Desmos to graph things. I invite you to use that tool as well. It's a good platform for playing around, especially when you're a millennial like me with bad handwriting and whatnot, and don't want to use MS Paint for everything like I did here. Or no, I guess I did that somewhere else. All right. So now we're going to talk about producer surplus rather than consumer surplus, focusing on producers, and if they're willing to sell a good at a certain price, but they're able to sell it for a greater price. That is additional benefit they enjoy. So I say here, to produce, there's a cost or opportunity cost, and the value of everything the seller must give up order to produce a good, we have to factor in all costs when we're doing studying economics. So we're really just flipping around a mirror when we're talking about producer surplus. Similar thing, we're going to talk about the producer schedules. You're looking at it from the other side of this, right? So we've got this step here. If we look here, if Andy is willing to sell for 500 but is able to charge 600, then they have a producer surplus, of $100. If the price increases and more sellers enter the market, Andy's going to enjoy a higher price and increase his producer surplus. Now Pablo is also going to enjoy some producer surplus as well. As the price increases, more sellers will enter the market and enjoy greater producer surplus. You can see raising the price increases the area here for the initial sellers, and then for the new sellers, they now have an area of producer surplus, just like we discussed for consumer surplus. So pause here, take the quick quiz, think through it just like we thought through the previous problems. For question 4, Diego, Emmy, and Finn are available to work as tutors for the semester. The opportunity cost is $100 for Diego, $200 for Emmy, and $400 for Finn. The university is hiring tutors at $300. So what does the producer surplus equal? Well, who is going to tutor at a price of $300? Just going to be Diego and Emmy. Finn is going to do other things with his time. So we're going to have $200 of surplus for Diego, $100 for Emmy. So the answer is C, $300 total producer surplus. So question 5, Gavin has been working full-time as a gardener for $300 a week. The market price of gardeners rises to $400. Hector now becomes a gardener as well. How much does producer surplus rise as a result of this price increase? That answer is going to be B, between $100 and $200. So we know that Gavin is going to enjoy a $100 price producer surplus increase. However, we don't know what Diego's opportunity cost was. We just know that at $300, he was not willing to do this, so his producer surplus has to be somewhere between $0 and $100, because if his opportunity cost was, say, $301, his consumer surplus would be $99 added on to Gavin's $100. So it's going to be between $100 and $200 additional producer surplus. Now, question C, supply curve for a product is US equals 2P. The market price is $10. What is the producer surplus? And graph the supply curve and recall the formula for the area of the triangle. Got that I did a graph to show. Question 5 here. So I'll let you read through this for more of an explanation. Obviously, I used MS Paint here to show this. Well, I'll explain more what I already said. But for question 6, I went into Desmos and showed that the answer is going to be C, $100 producer surplus. So our quantity is going to be 20 cents. You can see using this equation that at $10, that is the quantity supplied, and we're working with the producer surplus here, so we're looking at the supply curve. And our height will be the difference between the minimum price and the market price. So how are we going to find that? Knowing that the area of the triangle is 1/2 base times height, and we know that one side is 20 for the quantity, one side of the triangle, and then the other side is 10, the price. It's going to be 1/2 20 times 10, or 100. So our answer is C. It's good a lot of times to graph things or build a chart that'll help you walk through some of these questions. Oops. Then showed here that you can mess around with graphs and see how that will change surplus and other values you can measure. Right, so now we're going to talk about market efficiency. So you'll hear me throughout this course sometimes mention social planners or anyone involved trying to plan an intervention in the economy. What policies should they have? Well, we have to think through well-being. What are our goals and how do we measure if we're succeeding at those goals? So we've talked about surplus and how do we maximize that surplus. Now you can worry about total surplus, so the combination of consumer and producer surplus, or you can worry about consumers more or producers more, and maybe that depends on whose votes you're trying to court. But you can see here the total surplus is the value to buyers minus the amount paid by buyers, so the consumer surplus. Then the amount received by sellers minus the cost of sellers, or the producer surplus. Efficiency is the property of a resource allocation at maximizing the total surplus received by all members of society. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about tariffs and their impact on total surplus. Equality, the property of distributing economic prosperity uniformly among the members of society, and not everyone feels that is important, and it can mean different things to different peoples. The people, on the West of peoples. If before you were born you were asked to design a system and how are resources going to be distributed, and you didn't know what situation you were going to be born into, this is a thought experiment you use to think through: do we think that things are set up well for society? You can see here a graph. You can see supply and demand, and then the equilibrium price. You can see all of this above the price is consumer surplus, below is producer surplus. As price changes, those areas change along with the quantity. Free markets are trying to allocate goods to the buyers who value them the most, as measured by their willingness to pay, which is some people feel that's a questionable way to do it, but it's how we do it. And we try to produce the quantity of goods that maximizes the total surplus. You remember that we're talking about total surplus. So right here, you got your supply and your demand. Demand being the value to buyers and supply being the cost to sellers. Well, here's the equilibrium quantity. Now to the left of the equilibrium, so at lower quantities, the value to buyers right here is greater than the cost to sellers. And to the right, value to buyers is less than the cost to sellers. So actually decreasing the quantity here back towards the equilibrium can actually increase total surplus, just like to the left of this, increasing the quantity can increase total surplus. That's why this is the equilibrium point. We're gonna, well, in the later version of this book, chapter 12 would be health economics. I'll make a additional video for that, even though it's not in the 9th edition. But health economics is an important area of economic study. Generally speaking, it's not legal to sell your organs. The result is that fewer organs are donated or supplied. That's a major problem because waiting lists are so long for donated organs. So people try to figure out how can you increase that supply. Some people want to allow people to sell their organs, but there are worries about people getting taken advantage of. Should this be allowed? there are pros and cons, and it's not a slam dunk answer what should happen, but you need to understand the pros and cons of allowing that or not allowing that. So this in the news talks about resellers helping to allocate scarce resources. If you're a collector, you may hear people talk about scalpers. Oh, they're buying up everything not for them so they can sell it online. Or if you're a music fan, you may complain about people buying up all the tickets to a Taylor Swift concert and then reselling it on Ticketmaster, driving up prices. But looking at it differently, it's helping. Some may say it's helping connect the resources to the people that most want them. In the case, in my collection hobbies, I view scalpers more as people that go in there just to buy up all the stock to just to resell it, denying people opportunities to see that. But however, there are times where there's stock at a place that I can't get to and there's no buyers in the area. If someone goes and buys that to sell online, they're connecting me to something I want. So it can be a contentious issue to discuss. So let's take a moment and please attempt the quick quiz, then I'll discuss the answers. Isabel values her time at $60 an hour. She spends 2 hours giving Jayla a massage. Jayla was willing to pay as much as $300 for the massage, but they negotiated the price of $200. So what's the surplus in this situation? Well, the answer is A. The consumer surplus is $20 larger than the producer surplus because the producer surplus, or Isabel, she valued her time at, or her massage at $120, but earned $200. So she had $80 of consumer producer surplus. Jayla was willing to pay $300, but only paid $200. So she had $100 of consumer surplus. 100 minus 80 is 20. So the answer is A. 8. An efficient allocation of resources maximizes C, consumer surplus plus producer surplus, that's total surplus. And then when a market is in equilibrium, the buyers are those with the highest willingness to pay, and the sellers are those with the lowest cost. And question 10, producing a quantity larger than the equilibrium of supply and demand is inefficient because the marginal buyer's willingness to pay is positive, but less than the marginal seller's cost. So that shows where if you increase or decrease the quantity, you can actually increase surplus depending upon who values it more versus what it costs. So remember, it can often help to write up a supplier demand schedule or graph supply and demand and help think through how things change in the geometry of all this. In this chapter, we're still operating under the assumption of perfectly competitive markets. That'll change later on as we talk about monopolies or oligopolies or a monopolistic competition. Remember I talked about how when you're looking at a problem in economics, you think about what assumptions you're operating under. And we've been focused on buyers and sellers, those who are party to a transaction. However, other people can be impacted. We'll discuss that later when we talk about externalities and market failures. Again, hammer home in your reading the key concepts here, and let me know if you have any questions. Here are the topics we discussed. There we go. Thanks, everyone.